Hey guys, it's Bianca with Lotus Theory Designs. In this video, I'm going to take you step by step from, well, kind of sort of the beginning to the very end of creating these nightstands, or at least the look of these nightstands, using Velvet Finishes Alluring, which is December's color of the month. It is a gorgeous shade of green. Green is one of my favorite colors, so I am super excited about these nightstands. And also using Prima Redesign Transfers. So without further ado, let's get to it. So when I said kind of sort of the beginning of these nightstands, what I meant was I already completed the prep prior to the paint. That part is kind of boring. I feel like it would be a blog in itself. But to briefly recap what I did, I started by cleaning. I cleaned the nightstands using Velvet Finishes Ready, and it is a deglosser and a cleaner. So the goop, because these are vintage, so you got to imagine there is years of, we call it patina, but it's actually like skin oil and ickiness all over these things embedded into the wood. So I started by doing a couple of passes using Velvet Finishes Ready, their cleaning product, and then I sanded. The Velvet Finishes line does not require any kind of prep or sanding in order for their paint to adhere. However, if you want smooth, consistent, clean results, prep is a must. So after I cleaned and sanded the nightstand smooth, I applied a few coats of shellac, and doing this, sealing in any kind of tan and bleed that would come through because these nightstands are mahogany. Between that and the repairs that I had to do, it took about a day. You might also notice that my tops are taped off. Underneath that, I did go ahead and sand and stain the tops because I just love green with stain, and mahogany wood stains beautifully. So now that I've given you the entire lecture on prep that I said would be brief, turns out to be much longer. As you can see, I am now spraying on Velvet Finishes Alluring. After one coat, I let it dry. I actually am going to go back and give it one more. However, you can see the coverage using my sprayer is really good. Of course, if you don't have a sprayer, you can always hand paint. The Velvet Finishes line goes on beautifully when it's hand painted, and it's also self-leveling. So whether you spray or hand paint, it's easy to use and you will get beautiful results. So now I am going to give my nightstands a little bit of distress, mainly around the outer edges of the drawers and the trim of the nightstands. There are multiple ways to distress furniture. However, I opted for the wet rag technique for these. The reason being is because when I distressed, I did not want to sand down to raw wood. I wanted the beautiful mahogany to show through. The trick to wet distressing is to not let your paint fully dry. You want it to be a little bit wet so that it rubs off easily. As you can see, I waited a little bit too long before I started distressing. So you just want to do this until you get the effect that you're going for. Really, it's artist discretion. I don't really think that there's any right or wrong way. I've seen lots and lots and lots of distress. I've seen just minimal distress, enough to define edges. Really, it's up to you. It's whatever you feel as an artist. So at this point, I've given my nightstand some time to dry, probably about 30 minutes. Velvet Finishes paint does not take forever to dry, which is one big plus in my opinion. So using a transfer from Prima Redesign, I'm going to go ahead and add these fern leaves to my pieces. You guys, I am not going to lie to you. This is a long, tedious project. However, the end result is just so worth it. These are going to be so beautiful. I'm so excited. So as you can see, I am rubbing on the transfer after placing it where I wanted it. The transfer in the package comes with a small stick, which I am not using. What I am using is actually a Bondo scraper. You can also use a kitchen spatula. For the smaller parts of the transfers, I'll even use my fingernail. It's really whatever you want to do. And I am just using my scraper here to embed the transfer into the paint. I remember the first time I used one of these transfers, I was so frustrated because really it's a technique in itself, just like anything else in this industry. And I remember pulling back the overlay of the transfer, that plastic part that you see I'm kind of slowly pulling back as I rub the transfer on. I remember pulling that back way too fast before the transfer was on there entirely. And so what happens is the transfers themselves, they're pretty delicate. And I ended up ripping the transfer in many spots. So patience is key when you do these transfers. It is of the utmost importance. You want to make sure that you're rubbing on and you're watching as you're doing it, as you're peeling back the plastic sheet. Behold the fingernail technique. I should also note that these transfers come in a pre-laid out template, and it's just on a large sheet which is cut down into, well, it depends on the transfer. I believe this one was 4 different sections. I say this in case you are wondering why I am ending up with small pieces of the transfer, and the reason for that is because, you know, I can never do anything simple. I've always got to make everything as hard as possible. So instead of using the pre-laid out template that the ferns come in, I decided that I wanted to have a more abstract look. Therefore, I am cutting out each individual fern from the template and then applying it to my furniture. Like I said, this takes a while. This is definitely not a quick process, however, worth it if you have the patience and can sit through it. So just keep adding these transfers wherever it is that you want them on your piece and repeat until insane. That is insane with awe and amazement. And voila! Transfers are complete. Now that that portion of this project is done, I'm gonna seal in my hard work using Velvet Finishes Protect, which is their polyacrylic, and a foam brush. It is super duper easy to use. Oftentimes people will ask me about using polyurethane water-based or polyacrylics to seal their furniture, which is what I use. And the reason being is because I'm not a big fan of wax. I like my sealant to last. Whereas wax, beautiful, yes, needs to be reapplied every 6 months to a year, depending on the traffic of the piece. So for this, I am just pouring a little bit of the Protect onto my foam brush. There are other ways to do this, which I will demonstrate shortly here. And I'm just wiping it on. I'm gonna actually go back, it doesn't take very long to dry, so I'm gonna go back and reapply a couple of coats. The trick is to not overwork it, just like any polyacrylic, any polyurethane. You don't want to overwork it, otherwise you're going to get streaks. So another way to apply Velvet Finishes Protect polyacrylic is to pour it directly on to whatever it is that you're working on. Using my foam brush, I'm going to evenly distribute it throughout the drawer, making sure to not leave any big puddles and to spread it using long, even strokes of my brush. One thing I didn't mention in this video is I tend to sand in between every coat, whether it be the shellac, any kind of primer, the paint itself, or even the polyacrylic. And the reason for that is because I like my finished products to be smooth as glass. However, Velvet Finishes Protect, like its paint, is self-leveling. And so that is partially why it makes it so easy to apply that, and it's just not a thick, goopy mess that can be difficult to work with and manipulate. And there you have it. A couple more coats and my nightstands are going to be complete. I am so excited.